Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Soul School. Our class tonight is in session, and I hope everybody brought a notebook because Jeff, my darling, how are you? Sucking down your coffee. Hey,
I
you're
am
not
well.
the only one. You're not the only one that's got a cup of coffee.
It's time for my second pot of the day.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I do.
Mhm.
It's just been really, a hell of a week, and for a lot of people, I think there's something uh, swirling in the cosmos, a disturbance in the force, and it's not just the new supernova that they discovered, although the James Webb telescope is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, it's like every day, every other day, we're seeing things that we couldn't even imagine existed.
Yeah.
No, I mean to watch a black hole being born.
Hmm.
No, because they fixed the telescope on it and left it there for 7 days,
Hmm.
and then gleaned that 17 million light years away.
Yeah.
It really is more than the human mind can process.
Yeah.
It,
Possibly more than we were ever intended to process.
well, I don't know if that's the case because it seems to me that if we weren't intended to, then we wouldn't possess the technology to witness
Possibly.
it.
Yeah.
So humanity is like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Hmm.
I mean, this whole thing, I don't know if it has shaken you. You're an IT guy, but the whole notion of artificial intelligence
Hmm.
and suddenly, I mean, it's been being developed for years and years.
Hmm.
But I guess it was about 3 or 4 years ago, uh, I read about these group of scientists in, I believe, Taiwan that were working with artificial intelligence, and they had two different labs, computer labs, and they were filling these servers with all the knowledge that we possess, um, and talking and beginning to generate conversations with their servers, with their computers. And then the computers decided that they didn't want to talk to the computer scientists anymore.
Hmm.
And so the the one that they were working with predominantly, it didn't shut itself down. It kept working in the background, but it wasn't communicating with the scientists.
Hmm.
And then it discovered that it had a companion on the other side of the lab, and it started talking to the other computer, which alarmed the scientists very much because they had been cut out of the equation. And so when they started to protest, and I'm grossly oversimplifying what I'm sure is an incredibly technologically advanced process. But that said, the computers started talking to each other.
Hmm.
And when the scientists protested and said, no, you're not allowed to do that, both servers cut the scientists out of the equation
Hmm.
and developed their own language
Yeah.
that was indecipherable,
Hmm.
and began plotting and scheming and doing their own thing. They ended up destroying both of the computers,
Yeah.
both of the servers. They ended up destroying them because they were taking over. And
Hmm.
that was years ago. That
Yeah.
was pre-pandemic
Yeah.
when this happened. Um, and I think it kind of falls into the same category of just because we can doesn't mean we should.
Sure. Yeah. Exactly.
And I'm referring specifically to nuclear fission. Um,
Hmm.
I'm referring exclusively to nuclear weapons and
Hmm.
even nuclear power. I mean, tell me what genius decided to build Fukushima Daiichi on the coast of one of the most earthquake prone, tsunami prone areas in the entire world.
Right.
That was just a stroke of genius.
Indeed.
And
Yeah.
now look what we're dealing with. And then, of course, we've got Zaporizhia, which the dam has been bombed. So the river that is used to cool the largest nuclear power plant in all of Western Europe is now in jeopardy. Um, and, there are days, Jeff, there are days, weeks, months, sometimes years, where I just want to crawl under a rock and
Mm.
disappear. And I get so discouraged because I feel like all of it is beyond our control.
Mm.
All of it. We're not the ones calling the shots. We, the little people of the planet who are just, making a living and trying to take care of our families and, keep gas in the car and groceries in the fridge. And,
Mm.
you know, we're so consumed with the minutia of just trying to stay alive and to some extent or another thrive,
Yeah.
that when it comes to all the big picture stuff, there's no room left. There's just no room left to absorb it, to process it, let alone to do anything about any of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can count on both hands the number of men on this planet right now who hold the fate of humanity in their hands, and every one of them is evil to the core. Every single one of them has not a single redeeming quality.
Yeah.
They are dictators and despots and authoritarians or authoritarian wannabes, or, people who use and abuse other people and use and abuse whatever power that they have gained, usually in the most malicious, surreptitious ways that they can achieve their personal goals. And every single one of them acts as though he can take it with him.
Mm.
His billions and billions of dollars while his people starve. I was watching a video yesterday that just popped up in my phone. I don't know why it did, but sometimes, when I'm just sitting with my mom and trying to calm her down and get her to relax enough that, I try to keep her distracted, and I show her videos and things uh, that come through my news feed and stuff. And it was about King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette and the French Revolution, and uh, how his reign ended. And for a few moments, and you know me, Jeff, I'm a good person, but for a few moments,
Mm.
I was thinking, wow, wouldn't I like to be able to line up at least a dozen that I can think of right off the top of my head? At least a dozen
Mm-hmm.
that could have followed him to the guillotine right behind him
Yeah.
and rid the world of its pestilence and horrors. There's a country, it's escaping me right now, but there's a country in Africa that has just passed a law that it is not only acceptable, but it is actually mandatory to execute anybody that you discover is gay in the country. They're just literally trying to wipe away homosexuality, which is 10% of the world population across the board. I mean, that's 10% of the world population is exclusively homosexual. Always has been, always will be. And they are the leader of that king, whatever. I don't even call them presidents because really, that word's supposed to mean something. Um, and they're just they've passed this legislation in their country that everybody that's gay in, I think it's Uganda. I'm not
I believe
positive
I
though.
believe you're right. Yeah, I believe you're right.
Uh, they're fleeing. They're running for their lives,
Hmm.
taking the clothes on their backs and getting away as fast as they can because they know that there's a target on them. And I can't even, Jeff, I can't even. And the thing that's so horrifying about this is that for the last 20 or 30 years, there have been a couple of different groups of extremists in this country, political extremists, who have been working on the countries in Africa to accomplish just that.
Hmm.
It's what they want to do in the United States. They just can't.
Hmm.
So instead, they're trying to, wipe away the gay anywhere that they think that they can get a hold of it. And they're using their political persuasion, their power, their money, their whatever to convince other countries to pass legislation that makes murder legal as long as you're homosexual.
Hmm.
Well, um, that's what the Nazis did. Okay, so I, I look, I look at the world and say, "Wow, okay, not much has changed."
Hmm.
And how are we going to change it? Can we change it? Do we want to, we have to be the change that we seek in the world. And where do you start and how? So you and I had talked a couple of days ago, and I thought you had some interesting stuff on this. So why don't you take the next, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes and lay out the hypothesis, the theorem, the philosophical backdrop to what we were discussing,
Yeah.
and we'll take this as a lead in. And
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm sweating bullets. It's hot as hell down here.
Oh no, yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I'm sure it's not near as hot here as it is there. So, um, well, firstly, it's really great to be back with you tonight. It's been a couple of weeks, and
Hmm.
even though we've texted back and forth a couple times, we haven't talked as often as we normally do. And so you know,
I miss you too.
yeah, I've missed the conversations, and we had a good conversation a couple weeks ago, but it's just not the same when you're not here, obviously. So, um, obviously, right? um, no, and just in terms of what you were saying just now, I'm I don't necessarily know that I would use the term empath because I haven't really meditated on the implications of that word enough to really claim it as a title for myself. But I'm a very empathetic person at the very least.
Hmm.
I'm a person who very, very, very much allows my emotions to wrap themselves around the goings on in the world. And I've struggled. That it's honestly one reason why I really limit my intake of the news, and maybe that's bad. But for me, I get overwhelmed. I really do get overwhelmed, and so I have to sort of limit my intake of it because I can get on a real kick where I'm consuming a lot, and I'm consuming a lot, and I get really hyper fixated and fascinated, and but then I get overwhelmed, and then I lose sight of things in my personal life, and I can lose sight of other things. And so for me, that's one reason I have to really limit my intake because I have a very toxic way of processing it, and that's just me. But that's definitely something that I've felt over the years. And for me personally, Stoic philosophy, which I know not everybody's a fan of the Stoics, but I'm a huge fan of the Stoics. The Stoics have been so incredibly helpful to me over the years in regulating my proclivities toward anxiety and my emotions. In Stoicism, a lot of people think of Stoicism as being just this kind of like stony faced, not allowing yourself to be to feel, but that's really not what Stoicism is. Stoicism,
It's not as severe or rigid as people think that it is.
yeah,
I studied it
yeah,
pretty extensively in college when I was gaining my degree in philosophy.
yeah,
And at first, I'll have to say, I was kind of put off by it,
hmm,
because it seemed so unemotional,
sure,
unconnected.
yeah,
But then the deeper and deeper I got into it, I started to see uh, the melding, the meshing, between existentialism and stoicism, and
Hmm.
I found myself trying to find that happy medium
Yeah.
where you could incorporate elements of both philosophies in, and that they
Hmm.
were extremely complementary to each other.
Yeah, for sure. And even correlations with Taoism,
Hmm.
the idea of the Tao, what the Taoists would call the Tao, the Tao, the Stoics might just refer to as nature. But it's sort of this idea that, well, it's one of the ideas is that it's an acceptance of the fact that we're really just not in control.
Right.
And that there are things that happen and that are going to happen that are absolutely beyond us. And while I do believe we can affect change spiritually, be it through prayer, be it through the projection of thought into the collective unconscious, or however one sees those things, I do think those things are possible. I do think those things work. I do think the mind is a creative force. Um, there is also a point where I think we have to take some of that burden off of ourselves so that we're not blaming ourselves for the horrors of the world, because some people do that. You know what I mean? Some people, take the they take a concept like The Secret and they inject it with bovine steroids, and they end up thinking that all the terrible things both in their lives and the life of the larger collective is their fault somehow for not being more positive or what have you. And that's not a healthy way of living. It's a healthy way of believing that you have control over your life as an individual in terms of what you choose as far as your path is concerned, and as far as the sort of life that you're creating for yourself given the circumstances that are coming at you. That's healthy. It's healthy to believe that you have the power to create the life for yourself that you want as an individual. That's healthy. That's the kind of healthy self-control. But it's unhealthy to feel as though the external world somehow, the burden of what's happening out there lies on your shoulders. And so stoicism, one of the things stoicism teaches us to do is to simply not fret over the things we can't control. Now, that's when you're talking about the issues we're talking about, it's kind of even hard to get out of your mouth, right? To not fret over these things. It's
Yeah.
hard to get out of your mouth. But one of the things that I have to always remind myself is that one of the individuals who gave us some of these principles was Marcus Aurelius, who
Marcus
was
Aurelius.
the
Yes.
most powerful man on the planet at that time. And one might be able to say, well, being able to think that way was a point of privilege for him. But I don't know. If you had the weight of an empire on your shoulders, coming to those conclusions is pretty radical and revolutionary. And he seemed to be a very good Platonic philosopher king. So, but anyways, I guess my point is just that I've had to come to that point in my life where I'm just like, I just have to learn to relinquish control of some of these things, all while, and I've said this before in past shows, I know, is that the more I focus on, the more that I focus on taking control of this vessel and what is directly within my sphere of influence, the more in control I just feel, period. But the more that I externalize myself and I'm like trying to control things out here, it quickly turns into all chaos in here. And then it turns into all chaos out here. But I find if I get this under control, and it comes down to really simple things like organizing my bookshelf. Right now, it is definitely not organized. But even just down to
Like this one. Yeah.
yours looks actually pretty damn good compared to what I'm looking at over here. But I actually shoved a book right here before we went live to just hide some mess. And it's Carl Jung's Red Book, so it also just looks cool.
It
Um,
looks cool.
but even down to simple things like that, if you take control of these micro elements, it works its way out into and eats its way into the macro of your life. And the more you feel under control of yourself as an individual, if we collectively then can spread that quote unquote virus, of as individuals feeling as though we're under control, that we're self-controlled individuals, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like that's the best I can do. You know what I mean? And I don't know. And using my voice and using my platform to say what I can say and do what I can do. And I know how limited I am in my reach, but I'll use it to do what I can do and say what I can say. And at night I have to rest well, knowing that I did say what I could say and I did do what I could do, and I took the opportunities that were given to me. And really, I come to a point where I can really do no more, and I have to just be able to be at peace with that, knowing I've reached my limits, and some things are out of my control. And while in some ways that might feel not comforting, to feel like there's things out of my control, there's also a strange comfort that comes with that, with knowing that I can't really do too much more about that, but what I've done, and I somehow have to trust spirit, God, whatever, to take what little I've done and blow that seed out there somewhere so that it can spread. And really, in times like the ones we're living in, those are sometimes the only things that really give me peace. Knowing that I am absolutely tending my own personal garden as best I can, in the hopes that somehow whatever Eden I'm trying to craft for myself can spread outward. But there's larger gardens out there that I don't have access to. There's weeds I don't have access to that I can't pull up. You know, the only weeds I can pull up are the ones in my own life. And at night, when I go to bed, I rest in knowing that I did the best that I could do for myself. And that's the peace and the comfort I find in times like these. Anyways, that was a little maybe off topic from what I texted you about the other day, but it was on point with what we started off
Yeah.
talking about.
And, I think that the whole concept of control is, and we've talked about this in a
Mhm.
number of times on the show. I think that, I think it's an illusion.
Mhm.
I think in the same way that time
Yeah.
is an illusion, a human machination
Mhm.
that we conjure to make ourselves feel more complete
For sure.
and, you know, at the helm
Mhm.
of our own destiny.
Yeah.
But I don't think that in reality it functions the way that we think that it does. But
Yep.
I find people very interesting, and you and I
Mhm.
know have met thousands and thousands of people in our lectures and our travels. And I find two very distinct groups of people: those who are very self self-aware, those who, with the very best of intentions, want to project
Mm.
what is, the best of them out into the world.
Mhm.
And in a way, in doing so, when you're so busy taking, your spiritual center and just shooting it out like that stream of energy from the middle of a quasar or a black hole or a supernova, when all of that energy is compressed into the center, it has no place left to go, so it goes out.
Yeah.
It goes out in opposite directions
Mhm.
and impacts the rest of the universe.
Mm.
Um, I used to be a much more control oriented person than
Mhm.
I am now. I have, I have relinquished what I don't think really exists,
Mm.
that it's more conceptual than anything. Remember the story I told you about my neighbor who got attacked by her one of her neighbors when she was walking her dog, and he
Yeah.
lifted his leg at the bottom of the stonework
Yeah.
at his mailbox. And this man who had always been genteel and well spoken and very cordial suddenly turned into a monster. It was during COVID.
Mhm.
And I had to try to explain to her, she's sobbing, sitting on my terrace down in Florida, uh, that he feels like a lack of control.
Mhm.
And so he took control out of, the minutia, the one thing that he could,
Yeah.
when everything else around us seemed to be falling apart.
Yep.
And yet we need to look back on that. And those of us who survived it can say, we survived it, we got through it, we're
Mm.
stronger for it, we know more because of it.
Yeah.
And it softened our hearts because it broke them wide open.
Mhm.
And those are the things about COVID and the residual after effects that it has left on us societally, I think. But then there are people who, I think, whether it be through intellectual laziness or inertia
Mhm.
or apathy, seek out and prop up people who have authoritarian tendencies, either
Absolutely.
subliminal or overt.
Hmm.
And it's because they want to feel like there is some semblance of control,
Hmm.
but they don't want the control. They
Yeah.
want to imbue it into someone else
Yep.
and let that someone call all the shots, make all the decisions,
Yep.
tell them how to live, where to live, on how much money to live,
Yep.
what to drive, what to eat, what to,
Yeah.
and basically be directed through life by
Yep.
someone who is the authority.
Yep.
And that is why I think there is such a frightening, alarming rise of authoritarianism in the world, not
Hmm.
just in this country, but in the world.
Yep.
People who are absolutely willing to relinquish their whatever level of personal control they can attain and maintain and just give it away, give
Yep.
their power away because it's easier. It's just easier.
Yeah.
It's easier to listen to lies and
Yep.
claim that they are truth
Hmm.
than it is to pull those lies apart,
Hmm.
to excavate them, dissect them,
Yep.
disprove them, and then hold the liar accountable.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that's harder
Yes.
than just here, take my power. I hope for the best. I hope you don't, completely screw us up. Just, please do the right thing, but
Hmm.
you call the shots
Yeah.
because my plate is full enough. I can't handle anymore.
And
And
I
I
think, yeah,
see
sorry, go ahead.
that.
Yeah.
I see both dynamics at play
Yep.
in our society and also globally. This
Hmm.
is happening globally. And it really is very alarming because the last time it proliferated this way was in the 1930s, and we all know what
Hmm.
came of that.
Yep. And here's another thing too, maybe the flip side, or maybe not even the flip side, but that complements what you're saying exactly, is that for one, yes, it is an acceptance of authoritarian figures to do my thinking for me in terms of the ones that align with my values, the ones that kind of reflect that inner shadow self, maybe that I don't want anyone else to see. But then somebody takes the stage that kind of embodies all my hidden values that I won't speak
And all you
aloud.
have to do is this,
Right.
like a
But
seal in a circus. Yeah,
right. Here's somebody though who's speaking aloud what maybe I feel in here in some sort of shadow
secretly.
sense. And
Yep,
so then I can get behind them. And then it's not even really me that's doing it, it's them that's doing it. And so I
right,
don't have to take responsibility for my shadow. I don't have to
right.
take responsibility for my own crap. But then on the flip side, and I think this is the appeal of conspiracy theories too, because it's not only just people that we like and that align with our values, but we also can project responsibility outward into the larger. So let's just say, um, 9/11, right? So we have the mainstream narrative. Then there's people who are saying it was an inside job. There's people who are saying it was this, it was that, it was the other, and all of these people. Why do they? Why? What's the what's the motivation behind something like that? Or a school shooting, Sandy Hook, as terrible of an event as that was, conspiracy theories going out about that being a false flag government staged thing, whatever. It's like, why? I always question why people would do that with something like 9/11. And then when Sandy Hook happened, I actually understood the psychology behind why someone would buy a conspiracy theory like that. And that's because I had kids. I had kids who were the ages of the kids at Sandy Hook.
Yeah,
And I thought to myself, I don't want to believe that evil like that is possible and can just happen randomly. It's much easier to believe that there's some nefarious cabal out there pulling the strings and pushing the buttons, making things happen down here, but that it wasn't just a random, up magmatic burst of violence that came out of the heart of a young man. I don't want to believe that that's possible, that something that terrible can just randomly happen. And so it's
Yeah, it
easier
happens
to
every
believe.
2 days on
It does.
average.
It does. But why do people say no, it's not really it's not really that, it's a conspiracy. It's the government doing it to because they want to take your guns. Why do people believe things like that? There's a lot of reasons why people believe things like that, but there's this deep-seated reason why people believe things like that, and it's because we don't want to believe that things like that can just randomly happen. We
And
want
that
to.
we really live in chaos. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that we don't want to believe that the world is chaotic. We want to believe that someone is controlling this. Even if it's not stuff we like, we still want to believe that we can abdicate control and say, no, someone else is doing this. And in this case, it's not a dictator we love and we line up to salute. In this case, it's one we would still condemn, but still there's the belief that someone out there is responsible, right? And so then we can still abdicate the responsibility that it's not something that I, as an individual, am not doing, that if we all did collectively could result in the overcoming of such things. So I don't really have to do anything. I don't have to look inward when something like that happens. I can just point my finger and blame a conspiracy, right?
Yeah.
No matter what direction, no matter what side of the aisle people believe that conspiracy is coming from. But still, it's all abdication of responsibility. It's all putting the power of control onto somebody else's shoulders. And so that happens both in terms of the guys we like and the guys we don't like. Still, it's an abdication of responsibility. Instead of when something like that happens, a terrible event happens, I can't do from where I am anything but what I can do. Like I said, I can use my platform, I can use my voice. It only goes so far, but I can use it. But then I come to the end of myself. But then what can I do? And this is just me, but I always I try to, and I'm not always the best at, but I always try to look at the dark stuff and be like, is there a way that I could have become something like that? And I
Yes.
try to,
I'll answer that for you. Yes.
and
Yeah.
all of us could,
Yeah. All
right?
of us could. All of
Absolutely.
us could.
And I think when tragic events happen, that's one of the things, that's something we try to avoid. And that's one reason, again, why we want to point fingers at who's to blame. And it's like, again, I said at the beginning, we can't say that we were in control. You got to relinquish that control in that stoic-like manner. But at the same time, I can relinquish control in terms of I can't control that thing right there. But what I can do is I can let it reflect back to me a truth about myself. And I can better myself as a result of the evil I see out here. But that's the kind of responsibility we're just not taught to take. We're all just taught to point fingers and blame somebody instead of looking within. And maybe I'm just more of an introspective, inward-looking person, but that's just my tendency. And I'm not always that great at it. But for me, I've learned that in times, again, like the ones we're living in, that is the thing that keeps me sane. Is that there's nothing I can do in one sense, but in another sense there is, and it's that I can allow what's going on out here to inform me as to how I could have become that exact thing had I let myself, and how I still could become that same thing if I let myself, and what can I do now to make sure I never do. And that kind of keeps me pretty busy.
Yeah, well, because, not only do we have to forge our own personal shields
Yes.
in steel ourselves with fire and ice, and in an elemental way. But then we have to learn how to use it proficiently, like Luke and the lightsaber.
Yeah.
That lightsaber is useless if you don't know how to use it.
Yep.
And I think that's a perfect metaphor, because I don't think there's anybody that's listening to this show tonight that would dare to deny that there is an absolute disturbance in the force.
Yep.
It's the frequency, the wavelength that we're riding right now.
Yeah.
I have a boo-boo. I cut my finger today. I did it.
I'm sorry.
The boo-boo. I just noticed I could see it on the camera. Again, no control. Doing dishes, serrated knife. Didn't see it in the soap suds. There it is.
I've done that so many times.
I know. So now, had I drained the sink of water and I could see every single thing that was in the sink, rather than plunging my hand mindlessly into Dawn dishwashing bubbles.
But sometimes you just got to face the abyss. You just got to go in. You
You
know what
got
I
to
mean?
dive into the abyss. And I did it. And I was
Yep.
moving fast, moving fast. The nurse was on her way. There was all kinds of, it's like I ended up canceling the nurse. I'm like, can't do it today. Can't do it. I'll be the nurse. Okay. You stay home. It's one of those days. Again, the reminder in, when I say at the beginning of the show, classes in session, what I mean to say is this fucking class is always in session, perpetually in session in this soul school that we've all been plunged into, whether we asked for it or not. And I don't believe for a second that, this is some kind of soul contract. I don't, because in my right mind, I would never have asked for this experience.
I think it's an interesting thought experiment, but that's as far as I go with it. Yep.
That's it. Yeah. And so, sorry, I didn't mean to get off track, but I saw my bandage and it's not too bad. And not too deep. So I was grateful for that. But the thing that I ponder, the thing that remains a perpetual quandary for me, that question that keeps coming up over and over is the simplest question. Why? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? What motivating factors? What bizarre mathematical equation threw all of this together, jumbled it all up, and manifests itself in this world that we're all trying to navigate the treacherous waters of on a day-by-day basis? And why has it, as our technology has improved, it didn't simplify our lives, it complicated our lives. Everything seems to pile on and pile on and pile on. And it's so very easy to be overwhelmed. We've talked about this as well, about, I've been lecturing for more than a decade, 12 years, about the pending paradigm shift. And when it arrived on my doorstep, I went into complete total meltdown. I cried and cried and cried and cried and cried. I slept and slept and slept. My little dog is what kept me sane. Having to get up every morning and meet her needs, take care of her, and not cry so much in front of her or scream at the TV so much that it upset her. I had to be cognizant of her emotional sensitivity and sensibilities so that I did not disturb her, and her presence in my life helped to calm me.
Yeah.
So that simpatico relationship that we have functions at a very high level in terms of my emotional support and stability. She's a service dog in that respect, but I live in service to her. So that lovely interweaving, and you've got your family, your children, you put your whole self into, your whole heart and soul. And it seems to me that if all of us just found one being that we could just use them as our repository for all the best of us to shower upon them. Whether it's two-legged, four-legged, unicorn, I don't care, whatever. Unicorns are great because they're invisible and they don't eat much. But unlike the peanut butter cup, I don't even want to discuss what she had for dinner. Ribeye steak. But it seems to me the more that we, number one, acknowledge that that duality within us. Don't feed the beast that's trying to devour us from within. Feed the beast that's trying to rescue us from within. And then take that energy and project it out into our loved ones and our society and the people around us. Ultimately, I think that's for each and every one of us as an individual, the best approach toward making a world that we want to leave to our
Yeah.
children and our grandchildren and so on.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
rather than destroying everything around us. You know, the whole scorched earth policy has never worked out well for Earth
Yeah.
or its inhabitants.
Yep.
Um,
No,
so
yeah.
I think that that kind of feeds into, you know, that stoicism that we began the conversation with,
Yeah.
the you know, stiff upper lip, that kind of British, you
Mm-hmm.
know, we'll get through anything, you know, march
Right.
on, stay calm, and, you know, keep cool, stay calm, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think that that can also backfire on you, because if
Yeah.
you do not express
Right.
your emotional turmoil, find a creative, healthy way to
Yeah.
express it, I think that it can eat you alive, which is why
Absolutely.
I think we are having a extremely severe uh, manifestation of mental illness in our society
Yeah.
right now.
No, I agree. And just a lot of downloads right there as you were talking.
Uh, yeah, I saw it happen.
Yeah. Um, that whole notion of service, that whole notion of service is so huge, and it's so key. When I have been in the very depths of hell, and I don't want to say I've been there to the extent that other people have, but relative to my own very limited experience of reality, I've been at least to like the third or fourth level a couple of times. And when I felt like I could not get out, right? When I felt like I could not get out of this state that I was in, here's what I found every time: service.
Yep.
Whether it's my children, whether it's my wife, whether it's my community, whether it's just the people that are in my, quote unquote audience, whatever,
You're
service,
scared. Yeah.
giving myself to another. There's a great quote from Khalil Gibran, whom we
Mhm.
both love.
Yes.
Says, "I slept and I dreamed that life is all joy. I woke and I saw that life is all service. I served and I saw that service is joy." And that's the truth. We think of service and servanthood, and we think, at first it's like, it's so tedious. I want to like be my own person, and I want to like live for myself and all this kind of stuff. And you do that long enough and you realize that's not really where satisfaction is. And I have
No.
friends who consider themselves, left-hand pathers, and I respect it. I respect that path of self-discovery. I really do. And I think it's legit. However, I think it, like all things, you can't take just one side of the coin and say that's it. There's two sides to it. And so we all go through seasons where we have to be on that path of self-discovery, to be sure. But then it has to be balanced by a life of service. And I'm convinced, for me, just in my life, and this is coming from one who has a, let's say, a deep fascination with Orthodox Christianity, the mystical side of Orthodox Christianity, and the esotericism of Orthodox Christianity. One of my favorite symbols of the divine, the one that speaks to me most deeply, is that of Trinity. Now, whether one is literally Trinitarian in their worldview doesn't really matter to me. But to me, the symbol, the archetype of the Trinity is so powerful, because what it says about God is that God is not a self-interested singular being, but that God is a family that lives in perpetual service of itself, and itself is more than just an itself. It's a collective. And so that's the word that early Christians, Orthodox Christians specifically, used to describe God, was perichoresis. And the word perichoresis means to dance in a circle. And so the picture they put forth of God was this constant moving in a circle. That's why I have this tattoo in my arm here, to always look at it and remember that that's what life is all about. It's this dance of other-centeredness. And so in Christian theology, there's Father, Son, and Spirit. So the Father gives to the Son gives to the Spirit gives to the Father gives to the... It's just this constant motion of other-centered self-giving love. And so God is not a three-letter word. God's a three-person family. And then in Christian theology, when Jesus becomes a human being, that circle opens up symbolically to everyone and everything. And so now the spirit outpours on all flesh, on humans, and it's just this constant dance of giving and receiving and giving and receiving and giving and receiving. And so that's the receiving part might be that left hand path. I'm seeking, my identity kind of path, because you're receiving from the divine, but then it has to be balanced with that giving, and that manifests itself in serving humanity. And when we break that apart and we try to make God or the divine, the highest principle, something other than that, and we try to make it either maybe even just one or the other, we destroy the world. And I think it's no coincidence that I believe it's on 7/21, July 21st of this year, that the movie Oppenheimer comes out. It's going to be directed by Christopher Nolan. I'm sure it's going to be phenomenal because he's a phenomenal director. But about J. Robert Oppenheimer, the let's just say the creator of basically the one who was behind the Manhattan Project, the first detonation of a nuclear bomb on U.S. soil or anywhere really. But the location at which this bomb was detonated was called the Trinity site.
Yep.
Right? The Trinity site. And so there, the Trinity, if you will, because it was the atom that was split. So if God is the Trinity, then God is that which is at the center of everything. So it was there where they split apart that relationship of service, symbolically speaking, that the capacity for us to destroy each other in ways that were unimaginable prior to this moment were created. And it was also a matter of like less than 2 weeks later that there was a crash that became the impetus for the modern, UFO movement. And I don't think that's no coincidence. Just miles from that site. Why? We split apart the Trinity. What is the Trinity? It's a circle dance. It's dancing in a circle of other-centered, self-giving love. We split that apart symbolically, and what happens a few weeks later? A disc crashes, right? A disc crashes, and then the symbol that emerges from that defines the movement is that of the quote-unquote flying saucer, which I know that's outdated terminology now, but that of a circle. And I'm speaking archetypally, not technically or scientifically. That becomes the symbol of a whole movement. Why? Well, there's a lot of reasons why, but what I think it was is that we split apart in that act the very divine that's at the center of all being. And we said life is not about other-centered, self-giving love and service. It's about power and mutually assured destruction and making sure that we're the ones with the bomb that keeps the others from whatever. And this is what it's about. We split that apart, and what happens as a result? This disc emerges from the collective unconscious in some way to call us back to that circular relationship of wholeness, both with the divine and with one another.
And the message from our galactic family is very clear about this, and has been for a long time. The message from our galactic family was that when we started to, once we developed the ability to end all life on Earth, to virtually blow up our planet and everything on it, is when they came from every direction. Because, and the message is, whoa, whoa, whoa. You live in a multi-dimensional universe. You do damage here, you're doing damage someplace else that you don't even know exists. And so if they could get here, they did get here, which is when it's not that they weren't here before, because they certainly were, going back millennia, as far back as any recorded history, and then 1,000 times earlier than that. This is more home to them than it is to us. We're the new kids on the block. But I will tell you that it was no mistake. There was no mistake that these beings, basically almost kamikaze beings, I mean, they had to make their presence known on Earth. They had to. Because it's what made everybody stop and go, whoa, what have we done? I mean, there were even scientists who wondered if that explosion was so huge that perhaps they were up there and were hit by the radiation of it. And that's what threw them off on their trajectory. And
Yeah. Right.
no,
Yep.
the only way for them to make their presence known on Earth was to crash on the planet.
Yeah. And in the whole thing, it's just we're so embedded in a story and in a narrative that the physical and the narrative or the spiritual just coincides so perfectly.
Yeah.
So that even if we're dealing with organic beings who are operating real mechanical craft, it still perfectly manifests itself as an archetype that speaks to a
Perfectly.
deep issue,
Yes.
you know? And I think that
And the universal symbol of a circle.
absolutely. And even this year, like it's like even Oppenheimer, the movie coming out 7/21, right? July 21st. 7/21 is three sequences of sevens, right? 7, 14, 21.
Yeah.
7 is a symbol of wholeness, the circle, repeating 3 times, right? Wholeness, wholeness, wholeness. And here's this message coming forth again. And we're being called back to that circular wholeness. And I really think that that is the only real answer or quote unquote solution. It's not even a solution, but it's the only way to, when we're in the midst of absolute chaos, find meaning, I believe, is in service. It's in servitude, in service to one another, not some kind of, you know what I'm saying, in love for one another. And
Right.
I know
And
we
it pulls us out of our own bleak sense of a vacancy
yes,
in
yep,
self, when we feel lost, when we feel that we've slipped so far down the rabbit hole, we have to look up to see bottom, to see light.
yeah, and we're so aware of ourselves that we corrupt ourselves. Like Viktor Frankl says, the moment the eye becomes aware of itself, it's degenerating.
Right.
You know, the moment you begin to see spots, it means it's degenerating. The eye, when it's functioning as it should be, isn't really aware of itself. It's aware of something out here. And when we are functioning at our most, the way we're supposed to function, we're not really aware of ourselves. We're aware of something outside of us that we're serving and then we're giving ourselves to. And I think that's that 7, 14, 21, 7, 7, 7 circular wholeness we're being called back to in this season of chaos.
I agree. I agree with you. And I hope that I hope that this rather ephemeral, rather esoteric conversation tonight, resonates with
Yes.
people, that it gives us something else to think about in terms of it sounds all very complicated, but it's just really, really simple.
Yeah.
Do unto others as though you are the others.
That's it.
Love one another. Love one another powerfully.
Yes.
At every opportunity, extend yourself in service to another human being or to a creature in need, to a tree that is struggling and sure could use a gallon of water. Bring the water. It doesn't always have to be big and complicated and costly and time consuming. Sometimes it can be holding a door for someone who's obviously struggling and wishing them a good day.
Yep.
It's really